Hello there, I'm Kios the Ronin Beatmaker, and welcome to Lounge Ronin. All things, everything. And before we get into it, if you are new to the channel, please make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. And on this episode, we're going to discuss Queen Nzinga, freedom fighter, slave rebel, a courageous ruler who set her people free. And without further ado, let us get into it. This article was updated March 26, 2020. Queen Nzinga, a courageous ruler who set her people free. Queen Anna Nzinga, also known as Anna de Susa Nzinga Mumbande, was a queen of the Nodongo and Matamba kingdoms, occupying what is today the country of Angola, in the southern part of Africa, who lived during the 16th and 17th centuries AD. Queen Nzinga is best remembered for her resistance against the Portuguese and setting her people free from slavery. Anna's early life. Queen Nzinga was born during the first half of the 1580s. Nzinga's father, Ngola Kujanji Kia Zamba, was a ruler of the Ngongo people. In the same year that Nzinga was born, the king began to lead his people against the Portuguese colonists. These Europeans are said to have been raiding the territory of the Ngunga for slaves, as they tried to fill the increasing demands for slave labor in their New World colonies such as Brazil. Additionally, the Portuguese were attempting to conquer areas which they believed contained silver mines. According to one source, Ngola Kilnuaji was deposed by his son, Mumbandi, who was also Nzinga's brother. The queen's child is also said to have been murdered by the new king. Perhaps fearing for their lives, Nzinga and her husband fled to Matamba. Some sources say that Mumbandi's rule was cruel and chaotic, and that he was an unpopular ruler. Others, however, do not mention this. It is perhaps more likely that Nzinga remained at her brother's court, and that the flight to Matamba was a later episode in Nzinga's life. Thing to keep in mind, and these are all light little introductions into a lot of these historical figures of antiquity. So I highly recommend and encourage people that if these historical figures interest you and you want to learn more, make sure you go out there and do a little more expansive research. But let's continue. Here we have an illustration of Nzinga of Nundogo and Matamba from the ENSCO series of Women in African History. Now, it's funny to, before we continue, to kind of think about lately, if you've noticed, we've been covering a lot of female queens of either from the Middle East and of Africa. Something that modern day historians, or even those of who advocate for, you know, black history or African history in Western society, will constantly, you know, regurgitate the same old historical figures while purposely or ignorantly ignoring known historical figures as the ones we have been covering as of late, which I highly recommend people, start calling those individuals out on their hypocrisy and ignorance and lack of proper history. Because it's funny how they will create shows and revitalize history to fit their narrative, but they won't make a show about Queen Nzinga and how she was able to essentially free her people. But that doesn't fit with the narrative that is being perpetuated currently in Western society. Something to think about as you grow and expand and evolve in your knowledge about the world and the society that you inhabit in. But I digress. Enough of a Ronin rant. Let us continue. Nzinga forms a peace treaty. In any event, 1621 to 1622 was an important period in Nzinga's life. It was during this time that the Portuguese invited Mabandi to a peace conference in the hopes of ending hostilities between the two peoples. The Portuguese had forced the king to flee from his court in 1617. Nzinga was sent to represent the king during the meeting with um, Jaro Karori de Sousa, the Portuguese governor in Luanda. One of the best known stories about Nzinga took place during this meeting. Prior to the meeting, the Portuguese are said to have prepared the room with only one chair. This meant Nzinga would be obliged to stand during the negotiations, thus making her seem inferior. Instead of doing so, Nzinga had one of her male servants get down on his hands and knees to serve as her chair. Wow. The negotiations were a success, as peace was achieved, and the Portuguese restored Mabandi to his throne, as well as agreeing to limit slave raiding activities. Nzinga also converted to Christianity and was baptized, taking the name of Dona Ana de Sousa. Her godparents were the Portuguese governor, Jaro Carre de Sousa, and his wife. However, this period of peace did not last for long, and the Portuguese renewed their aggressions towards Ndunga several years later. Think about the psychological warfare that was being fought between the Portuguese and Nzinga, and how there was only one chair that was provided. Thus, putting this, psychological game at play and having her look more inferior and more at the behest of the Portuguese. And being such an intuitive woman, she saw this game and decided to use one of her servants as a chair. This really plays a fascinating game here, because this is a woman in the presence of a male dominated environment, and she's able to upend their I would say their high ground on her by forcing one of her servants to be her chair, thus proving to the Portuguese that this is not someone to undermine. Yet, however, as we have seen later on, um, they will shake your hand with one and stab you in the back with the other. And that is something that is very prevalent in any of these interactions with colonial powers. Yes, they are um, were technologically savvy, but intelligent. I don't know if I would necessarily say that they were intelligent. I would say that they were more conniving and depraved in their machinations and deals and ways of handling their situations and conquering other civilizations. Excuse me, I apologize. That's my 90-year-old dog having a bit of a cough. But this is something that's really fascinating to see here. Is that like I was saying, with these colonial powers, they'll shake your hand with one hand and stab you in the back with the other. Uh, and I think this is a moment in history for Nzinga where she was kind of able to acknowledge this, but still was able to make peace by converting to Christianity, which was, the last way of solidifying this agreement of peace. But the Portuguese were going to renew their aggressions because peace is just a prelude to war for Western colonial powers at that time. But enough of a Ronin rant. Let us continue. And here we have that said meeting of Nzinga with the Portuguese governor. Queen Nzinga at war. In 1626, Nzinga became the queen of her people following her brother's death. According to one source, the king had committed suicide in the face of increasingly aggressive Portuguese presence in the region. Another source, however, claims that it was Nzinga who murdered her brother. In the same year, the Portuguese renewed their attacks against Ndongo by hiring the Imbangala to do their fighting for them. Unable to defeat the Portuguese militarily, Nzinga and her people fled westwards and founded a new state at Matamba. Now, I could see, her killing her brother because of the deal that she had to make in order to preserve some semblance of peace and security for her people. So I could see that being more of the latter than her brother committing suicide. Um, but that's just my personal speculation on the matter. But let's continue. In the same year, the Portuguese renewed their attacks against the Ndongo by hiring the Imbangala to do their fighting for them. Unable to defeat the Portuguese militarily, Nzinga and her people fled westwards and founded a new state at Matamba. And here we have an image depicting Portuguese people in Africa. From Matamba, Nzinga fought against the Portuguese in a war that lasted 3 decades. Among other measures, the Queen offered sanctuary to runaway slaves, and the Portuguese trained African soldiers who came to her kingdom. Additionally, she stirred up unrest within Ndongo as well, which was at that time controlled indirectly by the Portuguese via a puppet king. Moreover, Nzinga exploited European rivalries to her advantage. This can be seen in the alliance that she fought with the Dutch, who were the rivals of Portugal in the region. The Portuguese were cast out of Luanda in 1641 by the combined forces of the Dutch and the Matamba. In the following year, however, the Portuguese were back and managed to reclaim Luanda. The Dutch were driven out of Angola, and the Queen had to retreat back to Matamba. Nzinga wasn't ready to give up, and she continued her fight against the Portuguese. But more importantly, perhaps, were the efforts she made to transform her kingdom into a commercial power, considering that it occupied a strategic position between a part of the African coast and its interior. By the time of her death in 1663, Matamba is said to have had developed into a formidable commercial state that was able to deal with the Portuguese on equal footing. And there you have the story of Queen Nzinga. Fascinating little light introduction. Uh, Clearly, a woman who was a force to be reckoned with at that time. If she was able to hold off the Portuguese, I mean, that's that in and of itself is something to be highly impressed by. We when I learn about these incredible female historical figures, I get so excited because I just wonder how many more of these stories are there to be uncovered and to learn about. It's exciting. And as I've said in the past, I'm a big fan of excuse me, about learning about history. So I just think it's really important to highlight these people. And like I said in previous episodes, I hope that these type of female historical figures get their due justice, whether it's told in a small screen or in a large screen, but accurately portrayed, not embellished with bullshit and all that nonsense that's not needed. Because this would be a really fascinating story to tell. I'm sure there's more historical events with her that are probably pretty incredible to hear about. But the more I learn about these minor historical figures, especially when it comes to these female historical figures, the more I realize, like, you know, this whole idea of like the patriarchy kind of destroying things and all that kind of bullshit that the feminists talk about. I kind of laugh at it because I think about an incredible woman such as this woman. Feminists would hate her. They would hate Queen Nzinga. They would hate Queen Nzobia. They would hate Queen Kubaba. Many of these female historical women, because they have exuded femininity and intellectual prowess that these modern day feminists could never grasp and conceptualize. And I don't mean to sound degrading to women. That's not the point. I'm talking about this movement and how this movement does not allow for historical figures such as Queen Nzinga to have her day in the sun because she doesn't fit the mold. And and this is what I've been saying in this series that I've kind of been doing lately of all these, female historical figures, is kind of being a bit critical of um I guess the portrayal of history through the guise of leftist identity, or even right identity. There's no middle ground. And a character and a historical figure such as this woman, to me, seems like she would probably fit the mold of a strong feminine female character that also has probably a very strong political and conservative viewpoint that would be really inspiring for many, because she fits that balance. And this is just from a light little introduction, like I said beforehand. I don't have the full picture about her. I would have to do a deep dive. But just from what I'm gathering, she is clearly an incredible woman to learn about and to be inspired by. And I guess that's kind of part of the reason why I've been doing this series and covering a lot of these female historical figures of antiquity, is because no one else is going to talk about them. No one else is going to shine light to them. No one else is going to say, hey, these are incredible women that we should look up to, that we should be inspired by, that we should present to the world. No one else is going to be doing that. And I'm not here trying to toot my own horn or anything like that. I'm just saying I don't hear anyone else talking about this in the black sphere, in the black community. I don't hear them going out of their way to look for these type of historical figures and talk about them. I don't hear that. I'm sure in the African sphere there's probably a lot of that going on, but not in the Western sphere. And if you're one of those, uh, you know, FBAs or new blacks that consider themselves African, fine. But I don't hear you talking about these incredible individuals from Africa or from the Middle East if you're a woman of Middle Eastern descent. I'm just saying. No one else is taking their time to shine a light on these women, even if it is for just a moment. So just something to keep in mind out there as you move forward and educate yourself on this world. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Lounge Ronin. All things, everything. If you have made it this far and you enjoy what you're hearing, please make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. And please leave a comment with your thoughts below. Are there any historical figures you would like me to do a light introduction in? What are your thoughts on some of my feelings in regards to feminism and history? And please make sure to sprinkle in a little bit of that constructive criticism, as that helps me and the channel grow. And until next time, stay positive, stay focused, stay true, and much, much love.